Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Higher Moment Mastermind. I'm Sheryl Lotzar, happy to be your co-host today, along with Vern Schellinger, who's my trusted colleague and partner in all things career coaching. I have a recruiting background and I'm a career coach, and Vern has an HR executive background, is also a career coach, and we are delighted to be here today to support you in your job search. Good morning, Karen. Okay, so normally we would just kind of open up with who's got a job search question. However, today I think we're going to jump into the world of interviewing. Not that we have to stay here the whole time, but I just thought, a topic came up for me with a colleague recently, and I was just talking to Vern before we started the call, and I just think there's some what to talk about here. We can always learn about interviewing. So, by way of preamble, what I'd like to share is that, there are a lot of factors that go into an interview. Okay. So interviews are a little bit contrived, as we know, right? You've got an hour or an hour and a half or whatever it is, maybe a couple times you get to meet with the employer. It's like dating, but, much more contracted than that. And so who you're being, of course, they have their side of who they're being relative to you, but we can only talk to your side. Who you're being in that 60, 90 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever you've got, is incredibly important. All right. And the reason why is because they are using this, albeit artificial vetting tool. Okay. Because you can't, they can't have you work on the job yet, right? All they can do is have these brief meetings to find out a whole bunch of things all at once, right? In their opinion, can you do the job? In their opinion, do you have enough knowledge about who they are, what they do, right, to kind of minimize your learning curve? Will they like working with you, right? Like as somebody said to me recently, if we're stuck at an airport, if we're going to a conference together, and we're stuck in the airport for 4 hours, well, I like actually sitting there and talking to you, okay? That kind of thing. Do you want the job? Are you passionate about this? Are you a strategic thinker? I mean, there's right on and on and on and on and on. This is all the stuff that's going on in the employer's mind, and they're doing their very best to suss this out. Now, are they expert at it? No. Even recruiters, even seasoned recruiters typically aren't, okay? This is it's an art, and it's more of an art than a science, frankly, even though there's a little bit of science to it. And I say all of that because your side of it really matters. You're bringing your whole self to this conversation. And not only are you bringing who you are, you're bringing your background. You're bringing all of your experiences, and you're also likely bringing some emotion from your past jobs into this interview. There are a lot of things that you need to consider when in terms of how you're presenting yourself to this employer. And I want to bring up a couple of things. So first of all, I want to share a little story. So the other day I was reading a LinkedIn thread, right? And I saw this little story about Henry Ford. So apparently, as the story goes, Henry Ford once he was interviewing two finalist candidates. And he decided, for whatever reason, he decided to take both of them to lunch at the same time, in the same lunch. I don't know why, but he did. And apparently, both of these candidates were equally qualified. I don't know, Ivy League, this, that, the other, engineers, whatever, like schmancy people. Okay, fine. So then he walks out of the restaurant. He turns to one candidate and he says, "You're hired." And he says to the other candidate, "We will not be moving forward." So the candidate that he dismissed says to Mr. Ford, "With all due respect, in our lunch conversation, we didn't talk at all about the job, my credentials, anything. All we did was have like a chat, like about whatever, just friendly chat." And he says, "Why did you dismiss me?" And Henry Ford says, two reasons. Number one, the other candidate tried his steak before putting salt on it, and you put salt on it before trying your steak. And he says, I like people who actually want to try out the existing process before innovating. That's the first thing. And the second thing, he says, more importantly, he says, your colleague here treated the waiters with kindness. You dismissed the waiters and you only treated me well. He says, and as a leader, I need to know that you're going to be treating everybody with kindness. I'm like, right? And the funny part about that is the very next day, a lot of you know I'm a recruiter. And the very next day, I think it was, or recently, I'm doing a search and we have two finalist candidates. And the employer called me and said, "Hey, I like to take," not at the same time, "I want to take the candidates to lunch." I thought, how funny. I just read this little And he said, we're not, and he says the meeting, and it's going to happen right next week. He says, and this lunch is not going to have anything to do with the job.
Yeah.
The whole team's going to meet these people individually, and we just want to get to know them, right? As people, the bonding and blah, blah. I said, how funny. I just read this Henry Ford article, right? And he laughed. And I say that because there's an example of an employer, two employers, right, who are looking for fit in terms of the connection, right, with the team, because it's kind of like a family, right, that you're going to be stepping into. Now, of course, there's your side of it too. You want to know if you can work with these folks. You want to know if this is going to be a good culture fit. Clearly, you are the other side of this equation. Please don't hear, I'm not trying to over skew this to the employer. You are just as important in terms of what you want. However, what I wanted to talk about today is your success. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to bring up. And here's the second. So I recently got some feedback on a job seeker, somebody I know, who were the employer didn't hire them, and I found out why. Okay, and I'd like to share this with you, just as a concept. And I thought it was really interesting because the feedback was very candid, and I think a lot of job seekers could benefit from learning from this individual. And so the employer wrote to me and told me that the hiring manager said this about the candidate. Hiring manager said that during the interview, the candidate seemed to be throwing colleagues under the bus when describing problems at former positions and seemed not to take accountability. Basically, quote, anything that goes wrong is someone else's fault. Okay. Now, we could shake our heads and say, oh, well, I wouldn't do that. Well, it's easier than you think to slip into that mode, all right? Because when we are talking about ourselves, when we're talking about our accomplishments or our mistakes or anything like that, it can be very easy for all of us, myself included, everybody, right, to make ourselves look good, especially in an interview where you don't want to let the wrinkles show, if you know what I'm saying, right? You don't want to let the cracks show. It can be very, very easy to inadvertently make it about us. Oh, well, I'm so, and I'm this, and oh, I don't want to let you see my weaknesses. And if you see my weaknesses, you're not going to hire me. Actually, the opposite is true, especially these days. Employers are looking for vulnerability. They're looking for humility. They're looking for authenticity. They're looking for accountability. They're looking for people who, yes, of course, are qualified and capable. You don't want to be so self-effacing. They're like, oh, I can't do anything right in the world. Of course not. Clearly, you have to have a measure of confidence in the interview and talk about your strengths and your skills. At the same time, you want to do your best when sharing about past experiences to take accountability and say, you know what, I had this situation, XYZ happen. And, I want to share that I learned from this, yes, I had, of course, we're all a team here and we all have our part to play. But in this particular story, right, I want to share that, yeah, there were some things that went right. There were some things that, didn't go so right. So what I learned is on my side, right, I can't speak for the other person, but on my side, here's what I learned and how I could probably be better the next time. I am telling you that will go so far into showing your humanity to the individual, to the employer, because they want to know at the end of the day that you're not going to be throwing people under the bus, right? That you're going to be a true team player. We use that word, that phrase, it's kind of an overused phrase. I'm a team player. What does that actually mean, right? It means a lot of things to a lot of people, but one of the things that it means is that you are going to not only pitch in, help out, do all those things, but that when it comes to your part of the job, of the role, you're going to take accountability for your actions. Okay. Now I would say hypothetically, if I said this to all of you, you're like, well, sure. Yeah, I tried to do that. And we do, hopefully. Right. And sometimes we don't, right? Because we're human and we mess up and that's just kind of life. That's okay. Okay. But at the end of the day, that employer needs to know that you understand you are fallible, that you understand that you're going to make mistakes and you're going to try to learn from those mistakes, not try to be braggadocious, not try to sweep things under the rug, not try to throw people under the bus because you're trying to be defensive. No employer wants you to be defensive. You don't want to be defensive. I know you don't, right? Nobody does. We all want to have those kind of open and authentic relationships. But in the interview, the tricky part is how do you share that, right, in a way that doesn't like overly expose your weaknesses. I get that that's what people are trying to do. We're supposed to tout our strengths, accomplishments. But at the end of the day, there's still that subtlety around, hey, I'm still a real person. I made a mistake. I'm fallible. It's okay, right? And I'm going to try to learn my best from it, right? So I just want to kind of put that out there. I want to get Vern's thinking on this, and then I'd love to open this up for a discussion.
Sure. I shared an example with Shira before we started the session, where I worked with a client, and this was with a major pharmaceutical company. He had worked at this pharmaceutical company early in his career. He had left, and 5 or 6 or 7 years later, he was reapplying for another job at the same company. Having worked there, he still had relationships with some of the people who were there. He went through all of the interviewing process, and at the end of the day, they didn't hire him, and he was kind of surprised. He reached out to someone who he still had a pretty positive relationship with, and she gave him very candid feedback. She said, in your answers, you were just rambling a lot, and we didn't think that you'd be the type of team player we need at this company now, in terms of where we are and where we're going in the future, which is, again, a very rare thing. All of you who have interviewed and don't get the job, you really want to know why. And most employers are pretty, tight-lipped about that, because they're concerned about discrimination and lawsuits and all of those other things. So it's very rare that you're going to get the type of feedback Shira got from the employer, or that you would get it personally. So it just emphasizes that you've got to be at your best in that interview. And so rambling on in interviews is not a good thing. So again, this is why practicing your stories and being prepared, and showing the confidence and the fallibility that at the same time that Shira was talking about is just so critical in the interview. And again, again, as Shira said, it's not a perfect process. It's just not. But it is what it is, and you've all experienced it to one degree or another. And the best you can do is prepare, and if you can get any kind of feedback, certainly take that seriously, and do what you need to do to change your answers, or change the way you approach the interview, so forth and so on.
Yeah, I think the phrase, and you may want to write this down. I use this phrase all the time. The position that you want to take is one of humble confidence. Now, I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it's really, the two can live in the same world. Your humility, fallibility, I'm human, I'm going to learn, and I feel confident to do this role. Both in good measure. You don't want one to outweigh you both. Okay, Karen.
Very quick stories, as brief as I can be. Really great interview. Really, the team liked me. I liked them. And then they didn't hire me. This was the last job search that I went through, and I got feedback from the recruiter. They said you were too animated. You were using your hands. You were evasive. You were, not that I was talking too much, but it was I was showing my personality. And the woman was like, ah. So I have learned to match the demeanor of the interviewer. That's kind of can be difficult for me sometimes, given who I am, but just you want to match their persona, not to be fake, but not to overwhelm them. So I know that I have overwhelmed people in some situations. Second story, got a random call the other day, totally out of the blue. Who is this guy? Ended up being a recruiter, phone screened me. We had an hour conversation. At the end, he said, we even talked about the Lord as part of this. It was really neat. And he said, I think I've made a friend down in Brand. Never met him before in North Carolina. I think he's gonna look for me for opportunities, either the one he wants for me or something else. I made a friend. How I made a connection. I got authentic, and I just started talking about things, including spirituality. Really, really went well. It's interesting the connections you make, but you do need to be yourself, though. And that was a little kind of troubling on the first story, because I am demonstrative. and I probably would come out in the workplace. And so I wasn't trying to be fake, but I think you do need to match the person you're talking to.
Karen, you brought up a very excellent point, just the way you said that. Matching, but not being fake. It's very, very important. We are who we are, right? If you're more introverted, if you're more extroverted, whatever you're gonna be that person on the job. We can only fake it so much, right? So it's not about trying to be plastic. It's not about trying to manipulate or anything like that. At the same time, interviews are a bit of a contrived situation, not to mention the fact that many people get a little bit nervous. And oftentimes when we get a little bit nervous, we become, shall we say, more of ourselves. You're more introverted, you become more introverted. You're more extroverted, you tend to be more, right? Like, so sometimes just the interview itself can bring out a side of us that may be a little extreme, okay, as relative to who we would be on the job. That can happen. So my best recommendation is, and I'm not using this as a glib phrase, I mean this, be yourself. Be yourself. Now, being yourself on the job also means having emotional intelligence. That means that you're going to be engaging with different people in different ways. Hopefully, you're going to be attuned to their personality. And like in Karen's situation, right? So Karen is very extroverted. She knows that about herself, right? It's who she is. It's how God made her, okay? At the same time, Karen, I have to imagine that if you're in the workplace and you've got a colleague who is, as introverted as you are extroverted, you are probably not going to overwhelm them with your personality. You're probably going to naturally modulate a little bit, maybe tone down, a little softer speak, maybe a little slower speak. You're probably naturally going to do that. That's, I think, what Karen, what you're talking about in terms of mirroring them a little bit. Being relational relative to the other person. Still be yourself, but also be very attuned to who that other person is being naturally and be a relatable person. But be conscious of the fact that you are probably going to be nervous. And when people are nervous, like I said, they become a little more, or whatever. It's okay. This is a date. It's like job search is like dating. You want to see if you are compatible, if you can live together, so to speak, right? If on the job, you're going to spend more time on the job often than you do at home. Are you relatable, not only to that person, but to any person that you meet? In a group situation, when you're doing a group interview, same thing. What is it like when you're on a team? You're dealing with multiple personalities, right? Diverse personalities, people from all kinds of backgrounds and walks of life. And in a team situation, you've got to be a connector. You've got to be able to meet people where they're at. Same thing in an interview, group interview. How are you going to bond with the people on that Zoom call, most likely, right? It's that kind of thing. So being yourself, but also making sure that your emotional intelligence is strong. Steve.
Yeah, good morning and good to see everybody again. A couple of things. It was interesting we started with the Henry Ford story because I had heard that many, many years ago. And it stayed with me for the very simple premise of being able to see different parts of a person and different interactions and being able to make a somewhat informed kind of process or thought on them in those situations. And I always love the concept of saying, try before you do. It's the same thing, I think, in many industries of saying, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to try something, but be able to kind of acknowledge the fact that you're going through and not just making a judgment because something, sorry, air quotes, hate them, but do them, appears to be one thing and maybe it isn't. So I was really happy to see that. I think the other thing that sort or these kind of conversations also tell you about when you're interview is where the either hiring manager or where the culture mindset might be at for that particular association or company. If they're asking you that kind of question or they're putting you in that kind of scenario, it talks to me about being able to be emotionally intelligent on the job and not just focused on can they get X, Y, and Z done. And especially in the technology space or the technology support space where I'm in, that's a very real thing. There are many employers that even without realizing it, that's kind of their model and their mindset. They go into interviews. This person has X, Y, and Z skill. Can they demonstrate that through defined stories? Can they convince me that that's going to be a focus? That is a focus. That's great. but it's not the only thing that really successful people or engaged people are going to need to be able to do for any company. So that I think really is a key thing to be thinking about. And lastly, Vern, I think the last time we were around, it came about somehow, but that series of conversations leads me to where, for me, I'm very comfortable in interviews only because I try not to think of it as an interview and more as a conversation. But with that mindset, I keep one basic thing in mind. Make sure you answer the question that was asked every single time.
Right.
Because to the example that was given, the rambling can be, thought of maybe as cover. It can be thought of as many things. It can be thought of as somebody doesn't have that skill set. And that is a very big, I don't want to say trigger, but kind of point for me to say, hey, you asked this question about this. The answer you're looking for is this, but here's maybe some, if the situation calls for it or allows for it, here's kind of some things that offshoot from that are also worth considering. So just make sure, for me, you answer the question. So I think that's been really helpful.
Those are all fantastic points. Vern, did you want to share first?
No, go ahead, Chair.
So those are fantastic points. I just want to riff off of one, like a tributary off of the last thing that you said, actually, that isn't related to who we're being, because this is the conversation we're having now with who we are as a person. But there is this, how employers are looking for lots of things from you. One of the many things is they're looking for typically a sense of strategic thinking, that sort of dot connecting kind of a thing. And also how much homework you've done on them, how much you know their industry, how much you know the company, how much you're able to demonstrate to them that you can stand up this role. So to springboard off of the last thing that you said, Steve, around answer the question, but then also you can add a little something something. That little something something could be, a lot of things you could do with that, but one thing you can do is turn this, what I call, from a game of racquetball to a game of tennis. So racquetball, and a racquetball interview, this is my terminology. Racquetball interview is they cue, you A. They cue, you A. A, Q, Q, Q. Tennis is QA, QA, QA. Meaning they cue, you A, semicolon, you ask them a Q. And the Q could have to do something with the role. Like they're asking you a question about whatever, skill set, whatever. You answer your question, give your accomplishment story. You can say, that leads me to ask a question of you around that topic, right? And you can say, because I was reading about your company, I was reading about your organization, I was, thinking about this and that, and the other, or 20 minutes ago, you shared a specific aspect about the role, and it made me think, I wonder, is this the kind of thing that you might consider, or how have you handled XYZ in the past, and how have you dealt with these constituents, or whatever? But that you springboard off of that A into another Q, and then it becomes a conversation rather than you as the job seeker with your hands in your lap. Okay.
Yeah, I absolutely identify with that, because I think it's hard to get comfortable with that or know situationally where that's really able to kind of develop. You get a sense of it if somebody is very engaged and conversive in terms of their interview style. It can be more difficult when, as you're saying, it's more of the racquetball kind of piece to it. For me, I always look at, if I'm posting for a job, if I'm engaging with somebody and I've done that research, I have at least 15 or 20 different questions that I can ask based on that research, not all at once, not all to the same person, but there are some core things that I really want to know. And if I'm an employer, I want people to be asking me about the company. I want them to be asking me about the culture and kind of the engagement and philosophy. I want them, especially in tech, I want them to be asking about the business and the sustainability and kind of the industry from what I know. I want to see that they've had that kind of thought process to say, it's not just about marketing, or it's not just about tech support, or it's not just about business development. It's a combination of these things. If I'm interviewing for one of those roles, I don't necessarily have to know how to do all those things, but by the fact that I'm interested in them, it shows the depth of what I'm willing to bring to the table. And conversely, for a candidate, if they're asking those questions, it shows me they've done some research. And it shows me that they're more willing. If I've got 3 candidates and I have one that's kind of, to our example, kind of a little more all over the board or kind of expressive with those things. I have one that's a little bit more subdued, but I then have one that's kind of that balance point for them. I'm gravitating maybe towards that, because even if they don't have all the skills I'm looking for, they've got all the pieces of that particular puzzle that are going to make potentially a good fit. So
Some employers say hire an attitude, train on skill. That doesn't
Yeah.
always work, but that's the idea.
thank you.
Sure. I can share another story, but Sally's had her hand up for a while. So why don't we get Sally's question in, and then I'll share a story.
Absolutely. Sally, you're on mute.
Yeah, it wasn't really as much of a question as a comment, because Karen said she's very vocal and very outgoing and uses her hands a lot. And when I was thinking with the Henry Ford example, I would be sitting there not saying a word because I'm much more introverted. And I would be waiting for the leader to make sure that I had all of the points that he or she was trying to make. And, I just, the introvert part does come out in me quite a bit. And sometimes I'm trying to listen too hard and not necessarily get to the point of what I'm doing.
I haven't read the book, but it was very popular at one point a number of years ago, called Quiet.
I was just thinking about when you were telling that story, it's like, I need to read that book.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story, and Karen would appreciate this one, but my family and I went on this train exhibition, a 3-day train exhibition, and the guy who moderated it talked through the entire program, and he just kept going on, and you just didn't know how somebody can talk that much. But it was literally 3 days. And in the bus on the way to Cass, which is where we were going, he said everybody needs to be quiet on the bus because you can't listen to things. And this woman was reading the book Quiet, and we were just laughing because he did not stop the entire way. And finally, the bus driver said, "I'm going down some very steep hills, and you need to stop." And he finally stopped. But once he hit the bottom of the hill and we were on plain road again, he was going away, going on and on and on. So that was just aside for the morning. I'm sorry, but
That's okay.
yes,
Intelligence,
I haven't
right?
read the book, but I do need to read it.
Well, and Sally, I mean, I think if you've done some practice interviews or mock interviews and get some feedback from people in terms of, you've got to draw that out, that's going to be really important for you from an interviewing standpoint to show that, the quiet introvert that you are.
Yes.
You've got to convince them that there's, that about the rest of your personality and the skills you can bring, and really it's about self-promotion. I mean, you're really trying to communicate to the employer your expertise, your skills, so you've got to do some boasting. You've got to do some
Sanders. I believe we spoke briefly a few weeks ago.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, it's about being who we are, and at the same time modulating, right, toward
Yes.
the sides of our personality that the other person needs to see.
Yeah. So go ahead.
No, but what I find a little difficult is if you have a group interview and you have those multiple personalities, how to best relate. Because one of the things I did in a recent interview is I went to their LinkedIn pages. I learned about them. I opened the call saying, "Oh, hello, thank you for sharing this personal story on your LinkedIn page," because it was helpful. It was something along the line of how she was in a car accident and broke her limbs, and now she came back from it. And I thought that was a really inspiring story. So I mentioned that. And I mentioned looking at someone else's portfolio. So that was my way of trying to connect with everyone on the phone to show like I relate to you and I have this similar experience as you. I didn't necessarily get that job, but I wasn't sure if sometimes I feel like that might be a little stalkerish for people. Like if I'm like, because if they don't remember what's on their LinkedIn page, or they don't remember that they shared a link to a portfolio of some artwork that they did, and I'm talking about an artwork that they did that appeared in the gallery.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I knew you were going to go there with that statement, like the stock. I hear that a lot. Here's the deal. We're in a social media world.
Mhm.
We're in a LinkedIn world. We're in a world where it's expected and understood that people are going to do research. They put their profile out there for the whole world to see. This isn't like you did some deep zero confidential surreptitious. No, it's LinkedIn, right? It's their they wrote it, okay? Which means they're okay with people reading it. And many employers actually expect that you're going to do so, just like you'd research the company, you'd research them. So on balance, my professional opinion is, right, I'm not saying that everybody's not going to have a different perspective, but my opinion is better to do the research and, if it, when possible, do a little bit of bonding, not, over extensively. Well, I noticed you go to this school and you did, no, like, but if there was something like you were thoughtful about it, you pulled out a little interesting aspect and you tried to relate and say, wow, that was really personally meaningful to me, or whatever it was. To me, that can only hold you in good stead because you're trying to be relational, right? And you've done your homework, which means you care. These are some of the subtleties to me that matter to me, I mean, my opinion, okay, that outweigh any sort of stalkerish thing, because again, you're just trying to be thoughtful and do your research. Again, that's where I said other people might have different opinions. Vern, do you have a thought?
No, I would agree. I would just emphasize the point of doing the research and then figuring out at the appropriate time when to bring that comment into the interview and that type of thing. But it's certainly the right thing to do. I'd absolutely support that. Yeah. And the other thing about interviews is, while there's so much commonality in terms of we all kind of understand there's this process we're going to go through, and in most cases it's fairly structured and fairly similar. Every interview you go into will have some unique aspect to it because of the person who's interviewing you, whether it's a single interview, a panel interview, whatever. And to Shira's point about, making it a tennis match and asking a question, my last interview for the last job that I had was with the CFO of the organization. So this is a pretty senior level person. And for the first 5 minutes of the interview, he talked about how much pressure he was under to refill this role with somebody who was as good as Howard, who was the former senior VP of HR. And I'm sitting there saying, okay, I get it. Howard was beloved. Everybody worshipped Howard. Why are you telling me this? Because this is not helping you, right, determine whether or not I could be as good as Howard. And at some point, so this is where asking a question. So at some point I said, well, tell me what it was that Howard did. How did he behave? How did he work with people? What were some of his accomplishments here at this organization that made him so revered by everybody? And then, so when he started to say Howard did this, then I was able, in most cases, to say, well, let me tell you, a similar experience I had at ABC Company, which then we got into the interview. But if I didn't ask a question, I didn't know how long he was going to go on about Howard. And you got an hour there, he's a CFO. He's probably booked from 1 hour to the next. So you just never know when you go into an interview exactly, what's going to happen. And then the other dynamic that happens is you get asked that question and you're just like, oh my God, I can't think of an answer to that. And now you get nervous. Now your emotional being starts to, oh my God, what can I say? How can I say it? Geez, I don't know what to say. So again, pause,
Mhm.
ask a question. Could,
Yes.
could you tell me a little bit more about what
Yes.
you're looking for here?
Yes. Yes.
You know, and try to gather yourself.
Yeah.
And maybe when they give you the follow-up,
Right.
it becomes a little bit easier for you.
That's right. Yeah. You get some time to think, right?
Yes,
When you,
yes.
right. And also to clarify, frankly, because
Clarify.
because sometimes you'll get a question and you'll be like, I don't know how to answer it, partly because there I could answer it in a lot of different ways. So
Right.
actually asking a clarifying question can help you target your answer. Oftentimes an employer doesn't even know how to ask the question or what question to
Right.
ask. And so you answer it the way you think to do, and they're like, well, they're thinking, well, that's not what I wanted. But then again, they didn't frame it necessarily the correct way. So if you can, on the spot, say, it's a really interesting, now, by the way, don't do this with every single question. That could get a little tiresome, right? But, you know, here and there, when they ask you a question, they're like, I really want to answer this the right way, or I don't know quite. Reframe it, have them reframe it. Say, are you looking for this? Are you looking for that? Can you reframe it a little differently? I just want to make sure I'm answering it correctly. So tell me, can you give me a little backstory around your question? That's another one. Then that gets them to talk a little bit about the role or about why they're asking, why that skill set or knowledge, whatever competency is important to them. Great way to sort of pare it back and say, that's a fascinating question, Mr. or Ms. Employer. Can you share, a little bit more about your thinking around that, right? Why that's such an important competency? Is that because I'm going to be engaging with these people, blah, blah, blah. They start talking and you're like, oh, okay. And then you can hopefully go ahead and pull out a story that relates to exactly why they asked the question.
Oh.
Karen, you're laughing. You're relating.
I know. I was that I really appreciate you asking that question. Thank you so much. No, so one of the other tactics, you kind of touched on it there, but something my husband taught me actually, when you get a question or a response to something or something, and it doesn't hurt to say, what I heard you say is, or kind of parroting it back. This is what I think you're interested in understanding. Did I get that? So enabling that a mutual understanding that I've got it, so that I'll answer it correctly. So
Right.
kind of parrying it back is another way to do it.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that you said complimenting them on their excellent question. It was so insightful.
That's a great question. And
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about interviewing, which we can continue to do. I just wanted to acknowledge that we've covered it pretty well. Anything, other questions about interviewing or comments or thinking? We don't typically do a deep dive like this on this call. So want to get anybody else's thoughts or insights or experiences. If you've had an experience on your side that you want to share that maybe was a bit of a conundrum for you.
Well, I've had some experiences. A friend of mine, she's trying to get a job in California right now, and she's had some interesting experiences just yet, where she had an appointment and like an appointment to have an interview, and that person who was going to conduct the interview was like, oh, I forgot about this. Oh, we decided to go with another candidate type situation. And then where she's been asked to give a writing sample. And I've done writing samples before, but I learned really quick that you're working for them for free. And it's like a way for them to find out, like, it's a way for someone else to do the work sometimes, where they might give you, like, give me a marketing strategy for this. So it's just, and can this but they're using that in other ways. So the question here is just like, how can you circumvent circumstances or events where you may be ghosted, or like you're trying to gain feedback in terms of how that interview went, and especially if there's some type of writing sample involved, how can you, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic out there at this time, it seems.
Yeah. There are lots of parts, to
Yeah, it's
the
hard to
question.
ask a question.
Yeah, I get it. So I'll try to address different aspects. Vern, feel free to chime in. Right.
Okay.
I'll pull it apart.
Mhm.
So first of all, the ghosting thing, whatever. So I'll just that first. So look, even in large companies that have full recruiting teams, and all the more so in small companies that don't, it is rare to find a situation where the recruitment process on their side is smooth and seamless. Very rare, for all kinds of reasons. People are busy, hiring managers, it's like the last thing on their desk. They got all their other work, and then, oh, by the way, I got to hire somebody.
Yeah, that's right.
Recruiters have 30 open job recs on their desk, and they're juggling 1,000 candidates, and it's like, and no, people don't often have really strong systems down to deal with the volume that they need to deal with. Okay. And so unfortunately, candidates can bear the brunt of that, where stuff like that happens. And thankfully, that doesn't happen all the time, but it absolutely can happen. And I like to say this phrase: pack your patience when it comes to the interview process, the hiring process. And I would recommend that if and when those kinds of things happen, just slough it off, right? I would encourage you to not necessarily think that it's make it a slight on the employer, like, oh, they don't know what they're doing. Well, they may not know what they're doing in recruiting, which may have nothing to do with how they conduct business. And just be like, okay, it happened. They're busy. They don't have their act to get okay. And then move on to the next thing, right? So that's the first I would recommend, just kind of, just let it go off your back. Number two, with the writing sample thing, it's interesting that you bring that up, because you're not alone. There are a lot of people like yourself who have a perception like, look, they're using this to get free work out of me. It's my intellectual property. You are not alone. Bridget, I'm telling you, over the years, I've heard many people say that. I happen to have a different perspective on that. All right. And I'm not saying it's the only perspective, because there absolutely could be companies that are doing exactly what you're talking about. They're trying to get free work. There is another side. And I know there's another side because I'm one of those recruiters who actually often asks for a deliverable. Okay. And the reason is that interviews themselves don't always share the fullness of a candidate's capabilities. One can talk about one's accomplishments, one can talk about one's skills, but until you see the deliverable, you sometimes just don't know what the candidate is capable of doing. I'll give you a perfect example. So years ago, I was doing a search for, it was a vice president of, I was like professional development or something. Anyway, it was for a diversity organization. But it was a higher education organization. I'm mentioning this for a reason. It's a higher education nonprofit. And I had 5 finalist candidates. As I recall, 3 or 4 out of the 5 had PhDs. And I think in 1 or 2 cases, like multiple PhDs. I mean, we're talking really, right, seriously qualified individuals. There's this one individual, Nicholas. I like to brag on him. I could actually say his full name, no problem. I won't, but I could brag on him like that. Nicholas. And Nicholas only had a bachelor's, right? And I asked all the candidates to do a presentation. And I wanted them to be thoughtful around how they were going to stand up the role, and, just ideas for what they were going to do, and da, 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 da. And all of them came with the presentation. Nicholas went the extra mile. Nicholas quoted the president of the organization. He had ideas. He was thoughtful. He had this beautifully bound, cover, like, it was the whole thing, right? It wasn't 5 minutes after he left that interview and the employer was calling me, jumping through the phone, we want to hire him. Okay. Because he took the extra step and he showed how strategic he was. He was incredibly thoughtful, and how he, and how he presented himself. And anyway, fast forward. So he gets the job, and like 2 weeks later, he sends me the cover of Ebony magazine. And he was actually put as, he was on the 40 under 40 cover of Rising Black Professionals. I was like, Nicholas, blah. But I say that because this is the caliber of individual we were dealing with. And he went the extra mile in how he presented himself. This was not about the employer trying to get more work out of him. This is about us trying to let the wheat and the chaff separate. And all the people were qualified, but he went that extra mile. So that is often why an employer is doing that kind of thing, to say, how are you going? give us a taste of what it's going to be like when you get the job. The way I like to say it is pretend it's your first day, your first week, your first month. What kind of questions are you going to ask that employer? How are you going to frame things? How much homework have you done? How do you think? And doing a writing sample that's of a presentation kind of a situation or a strategy or whatever. I'm not saying you have to give away all your intellectual property. No, obviously hold back whatever you need to hold back. But it's very helpful to give them a taste of what you can do to help them vet you. Because absent of that, all they have is the interview. All they have is their musings about what you're capable of. Guess what? This is an opportunity for them to show this good stuff, right? Actually give them a taste of what you are capable of doing. And I want to encourage you to, invite those situations, because you know what, Bridget, even if they do what you're talking about, the whole free work, God bless them, right? Like, okay, fine. But the benefit to me outweighs the cost, or the risk rather. The benefit to me is if they are being legitimate, and if it's really just about, hey, show us what you got, you have an opportunity to knock it out of the park. You have an opportunity to wow them and to actually separate yourself from the other candidates by showing them this amazing work product of what it's going to be like when you get the job. So that's, again, my opinion. Obviously, please feel free to do however you feel. But from a recruiter's perspective, that is the positive way of viewing it. Does that help?
I guess.
Yeah, it does. I'm sorry, Brian. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bridget.
Yeah, it was it was mostly the experience of my friend. I have kind of stayed clear of some of those work sample type, not here, those writing tests. Mostly because it's kind of, in some ways it's like I understand why some are looking. I understand some of it. But let's see, it's twofold. One of the big things is like, I've been in this industry for 20 years, I've have 2 graduate degrees, and then someone's going to ask for a writing sample. I understand, but it's kind of like, but I got the back. You can look me up, and you see there's Forbes, there's China Daily, there's all these things. So that's one thing on a personal note for myself. I can, on my friend's situation, she's thinking time, because she's taking like 2 hours, 3 hours, or 4 hours to prepare. Right.
And we do, and some of us do. I will just be, yes, absolutely acknowledge that. Some of us do ask candidates to go through their paces. When I do CEO searches, I am very clear about that. People are doing a presentation for that final level, and they are researching, and they are prepping, and they are doing a deck, and they're doing yes, absolutely. And that really helps us as, on the employer side to understand, how this person is going to stand up the role. And absent of that, again, we're just going back on past-based experience. Now, it is sort of part of the process. That said, you are the other side of this equation. And so you need your questions answered as well. You need to know if they're going to be a good fit for you too. Remember, it should be tennis, not racquetball. So even though they're asking whatever they're asking, that's okay. Let them ask. Do it if you feel if it's the right job and you want to, really go for it. It's like the Olympics, right? Go run that extra mile. On the other hand, put them through paces too. Ask them the hard questions. Ask them the questions that are going to help to determine, is this the right fit for Bridget? It's supposed to be an equal relationship. I realize that it feels lopsided. I get it. Just because they're paying the money and you're doing the work, it feels that way. But actually it's supposed to be equal. So come up with those critical questions. Don't hold back. I'm not saying you do, right? But just make sure that you know what's important to you in this culture fit, relationships, who you're going to be engaging with, the scope of the role. Is the role realistic? I mean, all these different things. Think back on the opportunities that you've had in the past. What's worked? What hasn't? Can you learn from situations that have not worked for you and bring those to the table? Say, I don't want to have this happen again, right? So is this a realistic opportunity? Whatever it is, I would ask those questions up front. And even though you're not asking them to do a deliverable, right? But you can ask them questions that will get them to say, oh, well, that's really thoughtful. Let me see how I want to answer that.
Yeah. Okay.
So here's the other side of the fence. As Shira said, a lot of my roles were senior HR roles. So I've done a lot of recruiting, a lot of talent development. And Bridget, I've interviewed people, and you said, I got this graduate degree, I got all these accomplishments. You go through the interview, you select the person, and then within the first month, we fire them
Mm.
because they're absolutely terrible. Because in the interview, you're making an evaluation and a judgment on what the person says. There's absolutely no quantitative, there's no actual, can you really do this?
Got
You're
it.
telling me you can,
Mhm.
but I don't really know that. I'm making my decision. I think you can based on everything. And then you
Mm.
hire the person, and they, for whatever reason, their communication skills or whatever, which you didn't get in the interview, comes out, and then you terminate them. So to Shira's point, the employer wanting to get a little bit more confident that you as the candidate here, we're going to make the right decision, because when we don't make the right decision, then you have to hire
In
somebody.
other words, it's to your
Fire
benefit.
somebody.
It's to your
Huh?
benefit that they vet you in that way, so that that you know that you are qualified to do the work in the way that they need you to do it.
Do it.
Yeah. There's twofold to
Yeah.
that.
And,
I
and, then the,
understand.
and then the other analogy I want to give that just occurred to me is the business community. Okay. So for any of you who've been, let's say you've been on the procurement side, and you've had, well, I don't mean a procurement department, but I mean you've had to hire a vendor. Chances are, not always, right? Chances are you've sent out an RFP, request for proposal. And I've been on that side because as a vendor myself, I've done that. Okay, I've filled out the proposal. That employer, that company, right, sends out the RFP, and they're asking that vendor to spend time putting together a thoughtful proposal, multiple pages, not cookie cutter. Of course, there are certain things they're going to cut and paste, but a customized proposal and it takes hours to do these things often. And Karen, you know, because you've been in the proposal management side and GovCon. Hours. In fact, in your world, it's not just hours, it's days and weeks and months, and you have a whole BD team, and it's just what is, right? Because because the employer or the organization wants to know, do you have the chops for this? Did you thoughtfully analyze what our requirements are? Are you able to demonstrate to us, not only, yes, I have the qualifications, but here's how I would stand up the role? Because that's what oftentimes proposals are. It's like, how would you do this work? We've laid out ABC 1, 2, 3. Our plan of action is going to be PDQ, blah, 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 blah. Takes a lot of time. And yeah, you're competing against other vendors, but at the end of the day, they want to make sure it's a good fit, to Vern's point. And so it's very similar, you know, in the candidate process. And Karen, I know you're shaking your head, but this is just kind of what is.
Mhm.
Yeah. Karen, did you have a thought? And Bridget, hopefully that was all helpful.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Karen?
Yeah, I'm trying to phrase it. We are going for positions that are going to affect either a group or a corporation. These are not just lower level positions. We as professionals here, we're going for something that needs to make an impact. Shira, do you have recommendations of deliverables that we could provide, not in the first interview, but in subsequent interviews? Well, after we had this conversation, Joe, I
Yes.
and here's this. Do you have an idea of what?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. In fact, I'm going to just underscore a subtlety of your question. Karen, what you're asking for is, how can you proactively provide a deliverable?
Yeah.
Before they even ask. And that is actually, when I'm in my career coaching mode, I will sometimes recommend to a candidate, a job seeker, that they do that without the employer even asking for a thing. You do the work proactively. Do you know how much that can set you apart from the competition? I mean, I have no percentages. It's like exponential. So I'm going to give you some ways of thinking about this. Of course, every job's a little different, right? You gotta customize. Here are some things I'm just going to things I'll tick off of my fingers. Number one, you could do a deck, PowerPoint deck. And in that deck, you do, now, by the way, everything I'm suggesting here, you've got a caveat to the employer. Look, I'm sharing this with you based on the information that I have. Remember that humility piece, okay? Yeah. You never want to come into any deliverable with a presumptuous mindset. It's actually why a lot of people don't do deliverable, because they don't want to come across as presumptuous. But the way that you avoid that, excuse me, is by having that humble, confident attitude and saying, look, I'm working off of the information that I have. Obviously, there's a lot that I don't know. And I want to present some concepts to you for discussion, to see what you think, to see if I'm on the right track. So for example, you're never, and I know you wouldn't do this, but like hypothetically, you would never say, this is what I'm going to do when I get on the job. I'm going to do this initiative and that. Well, of course not, right? Because you don't know. But what you can say is, I was thinking, here's a possibility. Employer, what do you think about this? Might we consider? Have you ever tried? I was thinking this might get it quite like with the question marks, the caveats. And so you come in and you do a deck. And in the deck, you could, to the extent that you have the knowledge for this, right, in your interviews, you could do a little SWOT analysis, little baby one, right? Maybe you don't have to, you could. You could then say, look, here's one aspect of the role that we talked about in the first interview that I have some ideas around. And so I was thinking, this could be a way for me to approach the role. Here are some stakeholders that I might want to interview. Here are some questions that I may want to ask them. Here are some factors that we may want to consider, because I was thinking about the industry. You may come from the industry, you may not. If you don't, do some research. If you do, leverage that knowledge of the industry to do some dot connecting and say, look, given what's going on in the industry, blah, 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 right? We're going to have very certain political factors, economic factors, blah, blah, blah. And that it really sounds like it's going to significantly affect this particular role in this department and your strategy. So given that, might we consider this and the other thing? Okay, so that's one thing you can do, is a deck that kind of breaks down like a little SWOT, some ideas, some questions, what have you. I would keep it no more than to about 10 minutes, 15 tops.
How many pages ish?
How many, how many slides you mean? 10.
5 or 30.
Yeah, no, in terms of slides on the deck, no more than like 10, but of course it depends on how much you put on each slide, right? Like I would keep about 10 minutes worth, however long that is. You can't, necessarily determine that on a deck. So I would do about 10 minutes, and you need, because if the employer does not ask you to do it, if you're doing it proactively, you need to get their permission, and B, have them find time in the interview. So what I would do is, after the first level, if they invite you back for a second, clearly don't do it until they invite you back. The second they invite you back, you can start to, work on this and say, hey, Miss Employer, thank you, we're scheduling for Tuesday at 3. I actually would like to do a very short presentation during that interview. Would that be okay? And can we find time for that? Could be at the beginning, could be at the end. Beginning is usually the best, because I'd like to actually help to frame the discussion, right? I have some ideas to present. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do, instead of doing a deck, you can do like a Word doc, a couple pages, an outline form, right? In an outline form, you could do, again, some sort of like a summary of what you understand the role and the challenges to be. And then some ideas, right? Literally like, okay, so step 1, I would, I want to make sure that we're clarifying our brand visibility, right? Step 2, I want to make sure that and then do little, ABC 1, 2, 3, and maybe you can put some considerations in there. So a strategy outline could be fine too. Thirdly, some people like to do 30, 60, 90 action plans, 30, 60, 90 day action plans. I'm of mixed mind about that. It's fine to consider. Here's the thing. The reason why it can work is because it shows the employer how you think and the kind of the steps you're going to take to stand up the role. There is a legitimate perspective. On the other hand, some people, I think, make that 30, 60, 90 action plan a little too generic, where they'll simply say, it almost feels a little regurgitated, like, gonna do a listening tour with the blah, blah stakeholders. And like, well, yeah, if you are gonna do one, make sure that's highly customized for that job. Don't just cut and paste and do a standard, this is how I stand up any role. You are going to really want to be specific and name names. Like, hey, in the first interview, we talked about stakeholder group XYZ. I would want to engage with them and ask these kinds of questions. Based upon that information, step 2, I would then, no, right? Like you want to get some specificity to show that you're not being too generic. So those are a few ideas, but also again, to go back to the first point, if you can come up with a specific idea, a specific initiative. In fact, Nicholas, the gentleman I was talking about earlier, he did that. Like literally, he came up with a whole program idea in that presentation, which is the thing that honestly impressed them the most. He broke it all down. I said, we could do this. Really impressive. If you have one of those ideas that you can offer in a kind of a humble way, that can be just very impressive to them. So hopefully that helps, Karen.
Thank you for your comments. I have, I think in years past, you suggested a 30, 60, 90, which I have developed and tried. And I tried in some situations went great, some situations fell flat.
Yeah.
Maybe it was not specific enough. So thanks for that feedback.
Yeah, sure. All right.
Just one other thing to add, Shira, and this connects us back to our interviewing. Just as you said with the deck or whatever you're going to do, you have to kind of qualify it and say, saying based on what I know, right?
That's right.
So that could also happen in an interview where they say, we're experiencing XYZ problem. How do you think you would handle that? And I would always start my answer with, well, based on what I know so far, here's some of my thoughts around how I would handle that, because you don't know all of the information. So you can't give them, the perfect answer in the interview. It's more about, giving them some good ideas or some good thoughts around how you would solve that problem or handle that problem.
They just want to know how you think.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, how do you think? And who are you being when you're doing that thinking?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So we're kind of at time, but I want to just see if there's anybody else who has any other thoughts. And by the way, it doesn't have to be an interviewing. I know we spent the whole time today on that, which normally we're more diverse in our topics. Anybody else have a question? Again, could have nothing to do with interviewing. Are we good? Okay, we will wrap up for the day. And as per usual, for those of you who want, after the call, for those of you who want to stay on for a few minutes, I'll lead you all in a short prayer call. Happy to be a support and encouragement to you. And for everyone else, we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Oh, before you go, one more thing. Sorry. I did have something I wanted to share with you. There is an article that came my way. Hold on a second. And it actually was by Kelly. Thank you for that, Kelly. It is about how to find jobs in the hidden job market. I ended up reposting it on LinkedIn. And hold on. I'm going to put it in the chat, but I'm going to put two things in the chat. I'm going to put the article is here. And it's a CNBC article. It's really, I thought it was really strong. And then I am going to supplement it with a video that I happen to do on the same topic of accessing the hidden job market. And I'm going to put that in the chat too. Now this is
That's what I was thinking about you when I saw that article.
Yeah. So there's the video. It's about an hour and a half long that you're welcome to look at. And for those of you who don't know, I do try to share this periodically when I think of it. So I have a page on my website of free videos, which is this link. And when you go to that third link, you will see the following. You're going to see all of these. See, they're great, but they're actually hyperlinked. These are a whole bunch of videos I've done, presentations I've done to job seeker groups on deep dive topics using LinkedIn and resumes and so forth. So you're welcome to avail yourself of that. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there for some free tips. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and close out, and feel free to stay on for the prayer call if you like. Have a blessed day, everyone.